Good afternoon, everyone. This is Carolyn Allshouse with Family Voices of Minnesota, and I think we'll get the webinar started. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this really important webinar today, and our two great presenters. We're very happy to have Leslie Cellini join us, as well as Jamie O'Connor. And they will take a moment, I think, at the beginning of the webinar to introduce themselves a little bit more to you. But I wanted to let you know that everyone right now is in listen-only mode. And we will open up the phone lines during question and answer time. So if you have questions, you can ask at that time. But you can also chat questions into the chat box on your webinar screen or your computer screen, and we will address questions that you chat in as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and Leslie and Jamie, thank you for presenting, and please get started.
Thank you. This is Jamie, and I'm going to actually ask that Leslie Cellini go first with her introduction, since this really is her presentation. If you had the pleasure of being at the Family Voices Conference, you will have seen pieces of this, and then I get to tag along and share some of our story along the way. So Leslie, if you'll talk about who you are and your family.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Leslie Cellini, and I am a family advocate, a disability advocate, and I was blessed to be given this position 18 years ago. I have a young man with the attribute of Down syndrome, and he has recently graduated from high school. And I'm looking forward to talking about our journey. It didn't end the way that we wanted it to be, but he is now the very first Minnesota GTO cadet, police cadet in the state of Minnesota, so we're very excited about that. He's meeting his dreams and goals, and I'm excited to be here answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Leslie. We're excited to have you here. My name is Jamie O'Connor, and I am the outreach coordinator with Family Voices, but today I'm co-presenting this webinar as a parent advocate. I have two children. My 7-year-old daughter has a rare genetic condition called Williams syndrome, and it's been our mission since she transferred from early childhood to the school district to make sure that she was fully included. So I'm excited to be a part of this presentation this morning along with Leslie. Leslie, do you want to get us started?
Sure. So I began this journey again, of course, with my son Sean in elementary school. And, I was that parent. I was not, educated in the inclusive education background. I was just a parent who had a child with a disability, and we were more concerned at that time about his health issues that he was dealing with. And, we believed what the school was telling us, and, that the segregated classroom was the best place for him. However, we found out differently, of course. So we're just hoping to go over and give you some information about, what some of your rights are, what you can advocate for, and to realize that there really is no end to advocating for your child, and there's a positive way to do that. So again, in elementary school, he was in a segregated classroom, and I couldn't quite figure out why he wasn't speaking or why he was having some behaviors. And so one day I went to school and I shadowed, or just kind of surprised him, I guess, in his classroom. And I walked in, and it was in a CUBS program, which is a segregated classroom. And it was just like the light bulb went off at that time. He was in a class with other children that were nonverbal at the time, watching a Disney movie, eating popcorn. And like I said, it's like the light bulb went off at that time. And it was a real eye-opener that things really needed to change. It was really explaining to me how, or answering the questions that I had as to why he wasn't able to speak or why he was having some of those behaviors, because he was around children that weren't speaking. So that's the point that we really started advocating for Sean, and we placed him in the gen ed setting, and within a week of being in that gen ed setting, his vocabulary shot through the roof. He was the only kid in the class that was raising his hands to answer questions, and understand that they may not have been the right answers, but his confidence level just shot through the roof as well. So I am a firm believer that inclusive education is a win-win for everybody. So, and that brings us to this slide that inclusion is for everyone, and quite honestly it is. If my son wasn't in the gen ed setting with his neurotypical peers, he wouldn't have been able to hear that conversation that was taking place between all the other peers and learning the appropriate behaviors and having those peers be natural peer supports for him, and they're learning alongside each other.
I often think of inclusion in the classroom is for students is disabled students learning alongside their non-disabled peers in the general ed classroom. But really the root of it is that inclusion treasures that diversity and builds community along the way, and in the process better prepares all students for the real world outside of the school community when they are their own community and and are employed.
Yeah, and it is all planning for that. If you're in an inclusive environment during your K through 12 education journey, it's preparing them and the neurotypical students to work alongside each other, because of course the students that are with him are possibly going to be his future doctor, his future neighbor, his future coworker, boss, and quite honestly, Sean could be their boss. So if we don't have them educated together, they're not going to learn from each other, and the cycle will just continue on. And like I said, it's just a win-win for everybody. We've had such a positive experience with his friends, and whether they have a disability or not, they understand Sean, they understand what he likes and doesn't like, and they enjoy spending time together. So, and this picture here is when Sean started football. You might have to Google the article, but it was a pretty awesome article. I was, again, at that stage where I'm like, if you can have him be on the team and just sit on the bench with the other teammates, that's really what he wants to do. And the coach was like, well, no, if he's on the team, he's going to play. So he took it upon himself to do some research and on Down syndrome and some of his sensory issues, and he fit Sean into the program, and then the program around Sean. So it was a great experience, and the boys that he played with were very accepting and understanding, and to this day they're still friends. Jamie, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, and this is a slide that you originated, so steer me if I get off gear, but this is just talking about the difference between integrating students with disabilities and including them. And Leslie and I have spoken about this before, but in Nora's kindergarten classroom, where she was being included with the help of a para, there were times where she was just sitting at a separate table with other children with disabilities. And, that's a good example of her being integrated. She was in the general education classroom, but she wasn't interacting with her peers, and she wasn't getting the same instruction. Mm-hmm. The focus when you're integrating a student with a disability is on fixing that student so that they can fit in. Or in our case, one of the barriers we hear a lot is, well, we need to prepare her to be a part of the general education classroom, where inclusion is a discussion around what all of the students in any given classroom need and how we can fit that environment for all of the learners.
Yeah, exactly.
In the integration piece, which is, again, a barrier that we've come across, we hear from the school district, well, we work under a pull-out model, and their service providers and their teachers are trained clinically and not to treat in the classroom, and so they like to pull the students out to focus on certain things. And what happens when we write a more inclusive IEP is that there's more of an indirect service model where there's a lot of collaboration between all of the service providers, the general education teacher, the para, and at any given moment throughout the child's day, they're able to focus on a number of different goals, and it's not that, 10 to 10:30 is teach, and all of those things are interwoven throughout the day. The other students in the classroom are included in those goals, so that when they're on the playground, for example, they know Nora's prompts. They're all working together. So Leslie, I don't know if you want to speak some more on this.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
I said I don't know if you want to speak more on this.
Oh, yeah, quite honestly, it's always been my belief that schools have a tendency to do things backwards. The one thing that I've always believed is that every student that is attending school is a gen ed student first, who just happens to have some special education needs, but those needs can be satisfied in the gen ed setting versus the pull-out setting. So, and the other thing is, with the federal law, it's so vague. It needs to be revisited again because to us, least restrictive environment means so much more. And there's no accountability right now being placed in the schools to ensure that kids are being educated in the gen ed setting first. So, like I said, it's just been my belief from the beginning of this journey that it's being done backwards. And that's just one of my favorite pictures, I guess. It just, to me it means, that yes, they have a disability, but they're still capable, and the expectations need to be a little higher.
I agree.
Yeah. So, and this is what I've been finding, through our entire educational journey with Sean is, inclusion really does mean that everybody belongs. So, whether there's a classroom choir concert or something, my son was really into music and loved choir, and he's been in choir his whole entire educational career up until high school, and that's when we were hit with a teacher that didn't believe in Sean and was more about the competition aspect of it. And she did come to us and tell us, she didn't think Sean belonged in her class. And when I asked the reason why, it was that she couldn't fix him, meaning she couldn't get him to sing on key. And, it didn't matter how his spirit shined in this classroom. It just mattered to her about the competitive aspect of it. And don't get me wrong, Sean was very, very adamant and very, very professional when it came to any kind of competition. So in my eyes, he was doing everything right, just like every other student, except he wasn't singing on key as well as the other students. So it did come down to this one time where they went to a state competition, and it was held in a neighboring city. And she had contacted me and said, do you remember the conversation we had? And we decided Sean wasn't going to be doing this competition. And I responded back that, no, I don't remember that conversation. So if you could forward it to me, I'd be happy to, revisit it and talk to Sean about it. And she was very concerned, because they were being graded on musicality and professionalism and how they dressed. And I responded back, I talked to Sean, and Sean said he has to attend this because his team or his classmates need him. And that to me was just like, okay, what we're doing is right, because he's seeing that he belongs in this class with his neurotypical peers. We just need to get the teachers to follow his lead. So attending, getting to the first bullet is attending the neighborhood school. That is such a key aspect as well. Sean did not attend his neighborhood school in elementary school. They searched us out because they had a specialized program, but it wasn't our neighborhood school. And that honestly did affect him and us. We were outside and we would hear the kids say, well, that's Sean, he's different. And so they were never given that opportunity to learn alongside Sean and to learn that Sean really does have a lot of value. The general education homeroom, I think a lot of schools are actually doing this now. I don't really see that as a major concern. However, there are students that currently are not attending that general education homeroom, and that is a really important thing. That's the first thing in the morning with their peers and getting to know each other. So avoiding all instances of segregation, it's the same thing, whether it's, a choir concert or a band concert or, just a general typical general education class. Everything can be pushed in. Okay. Collaborative decision making, that's just having a great IEP team too. It's, making sure that you can all sit down and talk about the needs. Whenever I attend an IEP meeting, I made sure to bring a photo of Sean. And so it was big, it was sitting on the table, and it just reminded everybody why we were there, what we were aiming for, and what we were discussing long-term goals for. Okay. So the next one is sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say I would add to that part of one of the strategies that I've learned is to make sure, like that picture that Leslie's talking about, make sure front and center are your child's strengths and interests, so that when you're collaborating on their IEP, you can base your goals and even the service delivery around what's going to work best for your child. And I'm sure most parents do that already, but that was a little bit of a learning curve for me. I started out my advocacy journey thinking I had to sell Nora's disability to get the most services for her. But it's been much more powerful to come to the table just as her mom, talking about what she really is interested in, what she's good at, what drives her, why she even wants to be in school. And that's really helped us add some positivity and start writing that strengths-based IEP that sort of, not forces is the wrong word, but it's the only one coming to me, that forces her to be included throughout her day.
Exactly.
And I think that segues well into your next bullet of the universal and differentiated lessons. Because really, if she's going to be in the general education classroom, then there's going to have to be some creativity in meeting the needs of the diverse population in that room.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely agree. 100%. Okay. This one's just basically, again, what is inclusion? It's solving problems as a team. It's coming to the table and everybody being on the same page and having the same goals in mind for your child. Just like Jamie was saying, the innovative and diverse learning strategies, it's, again, we need to come up with creative ways to get this done. So, again, making all team members equal. You as the parent are one of the most important people on the team. right, Jamie?
I think in terms of truly individualizing an educational plan, there's no one more important. And then as my daughter ages, she will also participate in that way. You know, each person at the table has their own expertise, and and the more they get to know your child, the more they'll be able to speak from that angle. But it's always our job and the self-advocate's job to talk about their vision and what they want out of their life and out of their school day. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then eliminating unnecessary supervision, assistance, and learned helplessness. It kind of goes hand in hand with some of the behaviors too, but the eliminating of unnecessary supervision, if your child is walking through the hallways and you have a paraprofessional standing right behind them, it does cause other individuals that don't have disabilities as well as those with disabilities to shy away. When Sean was in school, I had neurotypical peers come up to me and say, why does this person have to be watching him all the time? And it's like our kids are under a microscope. So in order for them to grow and in order for them to learn those appropriate behaviors and fail, because failing is learning, they have to be able to do that a little bit more on their own without that shadow over them. Yeah. So, and then as far as behaviors, we all know that behavior is a form of communication. Something is happening in the classroom, or your child is not being able to communicate that they don't want that person over their shoulder, or they enjoy being with their peers, but they're not being allowed to. You're going to see more behaviors because of that. Right? Okay. So, and again, using the whole educational bag of tricks, there is a ton of options out there for you to make an individualized program for your child. Never give up. Just keep advocating. If you don't have the answer, then ask another advocate. Call Family Voices and ask a parent advocate to, speak with you. Everybody has value, and everybody has some really creative ideas and what they've been through personally.
Yeah, okay. I agree. And in one of our previous webinars on IEPs, Rebecca Slew spoke about, if something's not working, it's time to try something else. It's not that the child's disability has caused that method to fail. It's that method didn't work for them. What's next? And where you can, finding research-backed methods is a fast track, at least in my experience, to getting those changes when you're sitting around the IEP table. It's not the only way to do it, but where you can find specific research related to your child's disability, if it exists, or disability in general. We took research regarding phonics instruction to several of my daughter's IEP meetings, because she's in an elementary school that uses whole language approach, but there's extensive research around her disability saying that the only effective way that she will learn to read at perhaps a fifth grade level would be through phonics instruction. And so that, coming as the parent advocate prepared with that type of information is a really important way that you can contribute to that conversation and to real change in not just your child's educational plan, but then there's other children now who are exposed to that phonics program in our elementary school who might not have gotten it that way.
Right. Exactly. And then as far as the dignity of risk, every child, that's how they learn. You learn from failing. You learn from taking risks. Let's make sure that it's beneficial for them. They're safe, of course, but they will learn appropriate behaviors by giving that opportunity of dignity of risk. So, and it does boost their self-confidence. a good example is my son was on the football team, and it was the high school football team, and he was, with his neurotypical peers, but we let him go by himself without a paraprofessional, without any kind of supports in place. And he learned a few not so good habits or behaviors or words from that football team. But on the other hand, when he did do something wrong, he would be disciplined just like every other person. So he learned, because he was given that opportunity, that he learned from right from wrong. So, and his self-esteem definitely escalated at that point too. He felt very, very empowered. So providing access to supports and after-school clubs and activities, they can write that right into your IEP. You can request that a paraprofessional attends, or a teacher, a sub-teacher can also attend as well. But your child can participate in those after-school sports or clubs with proper supports in place. So just make sure you add that to your IEP.
And this is one of those areas where we've really had to push back. And there's, on this journey, there's a lot of areas where as a parent you have to push back in a really collaborative and communicative way. But it is your child's right to be included from, in all aspects of their community. And this is one area that's going to help them build friendships. So I believe it's an important one to push back if your school is not providing that type of support for your student.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, finally, just being committed to making it work. So don't give up. Keep advocating. It is not easy. It's not always fun, but the long-term goals that you're aiming for are well worth it.
I think the phrase I like is it's harder, but it's better.
Yeah, it is way harder, but definitely, again, the perks are great. This is, of course, Sean with Chief Paul Hoppy. Again, he is now the first Minnesota GTO police cadet, and we're hoping to get that statewide. He's really enjoying it. We did this as his transition program ourselves. After, for 4 years, he's been telling everybody, I want to be in law enforcement. I want to be like my brother. His brother is an officer as well. And the schools didn't really believe that he was capable of doing it, so they came back with a transition plan and suggested that Sean be a janitor at the same high school that he graduated from. And that was really hard for us because nowhere in his IEP or any of his transition planning goals has he ever mentioned he wants to be a janitor. If he wanted to be one, great, that's fantastic. But he's never said that. He doesn't even like to make his bed at home. So having him be in the same high school he graduated from with his neurotypical peers, and them seeing him as a janitor just really, it really took our knees out from underneath us. And I, at that point, just decided that as a parent, I've always had to do this to advocate for Sean. So I searched out a program, and I found the GTO cadet program, and I met with the police department, the city of Wyoming. I did all the advocating, and I got it here, and that's what Sean's dream was. And if they're not going to give it to you, you need to make sure that you advocate to try to get that. And it's been very, very successful. And so we ended up taking his diploma when he turned 18. He did earn credits to graduate. We were going to be willing to hold that diploma in order for our district to help pay for the GTO program and use that as his transition program instead of the janitorial services. But they dug their heels in, and they wouldn't cover it or pay for it. So we just decided to take his diploma and move on, and that's what we did. And we're focusing on the future and Sean's dreams and goals, and we're going to help him reach those.
I'm reading here that not everyone is on their computer and seeing these slides, and so we may want to describe them more. So I want to say that this, if you have a chance to go back and watch this and look at some of the slides, this picture is Sean Cellini standing in front of a police officer, and Sean has a very confident power pose, and he is smiling as he looks up to this officer. So if you get a chance to go back after this webinar is archived, you may want to go through and not just check out the bullet points, but also some of these awesome success photos.
Yeah. So this is just getting back to, for decades we have been pushing for inclusion. The law is the law. And the law of least restrictive environment is, as I had said before, it needs to be revisited at this time. But I do truly believe that schools are doing it backwards. They're, using the term "our school doesn't offer inclusion." That's happening to everybody, and I know that. And that's why a lot of kids aren't being allowed to attend their home schools. They're being shipped out via bus to different districts, even because it's just easier for the school districts. And, we need to, as parents, just keep advocating that our child belongs in this district or in our home school and being able to attend that, with their neurotypical peers.
And I think that argument is one of the biggest barriers that I hear parents facing, and we've certainly faced it in our journey. When Nora was getting ready to transition from an inclusion classroom that was over 50% non-disabled peers into the elementary school, we were told she was going into a pull-out model, and so she was going to be educated in the resource room, essentially. And what was so striking to me was that my daughter's needs hadn't changed, but the minute she changed schools, her setting was different. And so it's really critical as parents that we push back at that point and say it's her right to be in the general ed classroom with her non-disabled peers. That's her right. What you're explaining to me is a program issue and a system issue, and my child's disability is not causing that to change. So, you might find yourself in, a mediation or some type of disagreement with the district, but it's very important that as calmly as you can, that you say that the law says this is her right, and I'm standing up for that.
Right, and a lot of schools do know that parents won't file for mediation. They know it's exhausting and it's expensive, so they take that. I think that they use that a little bit. So please know that there is 40 to 50 years of research showing, the benefits of inclusion. There is no research showing that having a child pulled out into a secluded setting is more beneficial for any student.
I added these pictures into the presentation because it was a visual image for me of what it felt like on the, for those of you who can't see, there's one photo of my family and two other families in our neighborhood, and all of our kids are playing together, and they're sitting on the grass, and you can't tell any difference. It's just everyone's together. And on the bottom photo is Nora in her preschool classroom, and this is her inclusion classroom, but I don't have a picture from the segregated setting she went to first of all, but it just looked and felt quite different. And it was very jarring. Perhaps other families experienced this, to go from Nora being in her home, in her community, in her neighborhood, receiving services there, to just being completely in a self-contained classroom, when again, nothing about her or her disability had changed. But you can see the smile on her face in her inclusion classroom, and she is quite happy there. She was very stressed out in the segregated setting for a variety of reasons. But she's just sitting at the table. She's just a student, because that's really what she is. She's just a student like all of the other kids.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and again, I firmly believe this, that students who have attended segregated schools are less prepared for the future than those who have attended a regular school. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing necessarily, but segregated schools are not preparing for them to live on their own. They're not preparing them to live or work in the community, to be, contributing members of society. It's treating them differently, and we're not able to prepare a student for life after high school, the post high school time. So again, segregated schools do not properly represent a true community. I think your last slide that you showed with your daughter in the classroom together with the neurotypical peers, that definitely represents the true community. Having our kids educated alongside each other is imperative for the success of these students. A true community consists of multiple abilities working together, whether that student has a disability or whether they have diabetes or whether they have blue eyes, brown eyes, glasses, contacts, whatever. Everybody every individual in the United States or in the world has some form of a disability, whether it's, like I said, glasses or diabetes or issues with their hands. It doesn't matter, but everybody has some sort of disability. So segregating them and tucking them to the side is just unnatural.
Yeah, I like the language, the environment of ultimate functioning, and I think about this from the parent of a child who's just in elementary school and not having been down the journey that Leslie's been down, but that it just makes so much sense to me that I can't expect that if my daughter's educated in the resource room and doesn't have good, consistent access to her non-disabled peers, that when she goes through transition, that she'll suddenly, and they will suddenly, know how to socialize together and how to work together. And and I have read research, and I apologize, I didn't add this to our resource section. I might go back and look for it. That says that essentially the more severe a disability is, the more critical it is that the learning take place in the environment of ultimate functioning, because it doesn't transfer.
Right, exactly. So, and there again is Sean. It's a picture of Sean at school, standing against a brick wall with all of his neurotypical friends, and he's just one of them. So they hang out together and they have a great time. So the benefits of inclusive education is, learning social skills from their peers, learning the interpersonal skills such as active listening, taking turns. That is incredibly important for, life after school is too, for the job skills area as well. Being able to understand emotions and leadership. If they're not together, they're not going to understand when actually somebody is, mad at them, or if they're getting physical with them, they're going to think that they're playing, and they're not going to understand completely what is taking place. Improvements in the student speech. Again, that's going to being able to hear what the neurotypical peers are saying. They're learning, proper behavior, proper language, communication, how to interact between each other, to sit down on a couch and have, a 30-minute conversation with somebody and have it be appropriate conversation. Increased likelihood of attending college or university. We're living that right now, with Sean. Unfortunately, in the state of Minnesota, we don't have any truly inclusive colleges here. We have a few that are, on the cusp of it. I mean, Bethel University is probably the one that's closest, but it's not. They're still segregated during curriculum time, but they're living in the dorm with neurotypical peers. So Sean has attended, and we're hoping that he can actually get in next fall. So it's a benefit, it's a perk. So preparedness for meaningful employment after high school. Have them take those, high school credit courses, not the segregated classes. Have them enroll in, algebra and, with proper modifications and supports, they can be successful at that. Of course, self-esteem, also increases because they build their confidence and they start believing in themselves. Reduce stigma. Of course, that is the same thing. When I was growing up, I never saw students with disabilities. They were tucked aside and in a segregated class. So this is removing that stigma, that they are capable of doing exactly what anybody else is doing. Okay. Again, the behaviors, where else better place to learn it than learning it from your neurotypical peers. You may also get the not appropriate behaviors, so be prepared for that. But all in all, generally, it's very positive. Okay. Next slide.
So I know that we want to save some time for questions, and we've got a lot to get through. But this is just I wanted to reiterate some of the things that Leslie just said, and talk about what the Inclusive Classroom has offered for our daughter. And this, on the far left, is Nora working with her general education teacher. This is her first grade teacher. In kindergarten, she didn't have as much access, but her first grade teacher took it upon herself to really get creative. She really collaborated with us. Moving forward, she will be a resource within our district where I'll refer other teachers to her to mentor. So that's one way that you can help continue. When you find a provider or a teacher who's doing a really great job at differentiating instruction, ask them if they're willing to mentor future teachers if the need be. Peer support, there's a picture of my daughter holding a classmate's hand. In our pull-out district, Nora requires a paraprofessional one-on-one support, or she has in kindergarten and first grade. She did not need that in a co-taught classroom because it was structured to meet the needs of all learners. But we're having to be very intentional about advocating that all of her cues are cues to look to her peers and what they're doing, advocate that her peers are supporting her social needs, supporting her independence or interdependence, as I like to say. Mm-hmm. There's a photo here of my daughter doing an assignment on an iPad. The student next to her is using pen and paper, so differentiated instruction and a variety of supports that are available to everyone in the classroom. So I would encourage any parent who's advocating for a specific support to ask that more than one go into the classroom so that all learners can use them. It helps reduce stigma, but there's also other students in the classroom who could really use the supports that your child uses as well. In the general education classroom, Nora has a chance to be a leader, and it's really important in terms of her own investment in her education and her own sense of belonging that take place. I have a slide on here of Nora swinging. In her school, Nora does her sensory swinging in the hallway where other students can see her. And it's really important that other students understand that there are a variety of ways to stay regulated and to learn. So we don't want her hidden away somewhere. I mean, motor rooms are great, but we really liked that she ended up hanging that swing up in the hallway, and people understood her needs. There's a picture here of my daughter dropping her weight and refusing to do math work. And this is what Leslie talks about, and the right to take risks. Often in our meetings, service providers and district leadership will use behaviors like that as a way of saying she shouldn't be in the classroom, but that's not true. Students refuse to work, especially in first grade and kindergarten, all the time. And she has the right to do the same thing. And she has a right to positive behavior interventions to help work with those behaviors.
Wouldn't it be great for your visibility slide if that was hung in the hallway and every student could use it when they needed it?
Yeah, I think it would be challenging in an elementary school. I think they would all be having a blast with it. But, to go and check it out and say, yes, I have a need to do this, to check it out and hang it up. And, right. I think, and we do ask, anytime that we're asking for support, there needs to be 2 or 3. It's not just about Nora's needs. Her needs are not that unique. We all
Right.
have a variety of ways that we get through our day.
Right.
But most critically, what students get and what Nora's been getting for being included is a sense of belonging and community. You'll see her eating lunch with her peers. The segregated classroom in her school, they all eat lunch together. They say they do that for staffing reasons to keep them safe. But it's a real miss in my opinion. There's a picture of Nora dancing. And one of the ways that she regulates is through movement. So they have dance time in their class. There's a slide here of Nora doing her very favorite thing, and that's swinging on the tire swing with friends. And she learns social skills and relevance, because when she's exposed to the same material as her peers, then those conversations on the tire swing and at lunch, she knows what they're based off of. She wasn't in a different classroom. There's some relevance there. Yeah. And I have a quick quote from Mother Teresa that says, "I can do things you cannot. You can do things I cannot. Together we can do great things." So really, I think that this method, even though it's harder and it takes a lot of coordination, is much better for all students.
Yeah, I agree. And this is just a picture of Sean. He's missing a date, actually. He had 5 prom dates last year. So, again, one of the perks of being in an inclusive environment and being around, every student, whether they have a disability or not, is them learning from him and vice versa. He is a very social guy, and, he had 5 prom dates.
Leslie, let's do a couple more minutes and then take some questions.
Sure.
And you've got a social skills slide, but we've talked about that a lot.
Yeah. And we can send this presentation out too.
Talk about presuming competence and the least dangerous assumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll be surprised by what they can do if given the opportunity.
There's a resource I'd like to add to our resource list. There's some research around how teacher expectations affect outcomes.
Yeah.
So it's very important that you go in and, frankly, I take a clip of the radio show that talks about that research in PR and have opened up several of our IEP meetings with it, because I think we need to remember that we as the adults are responsible for the expectations that we set when we're making those documents.
Yeah, and this is just a picture of Sean again with a couple of friends from school. He actually pulled together the entire school and did a presentation on spread the word and the use of the R word. So this is just a picture of them all supporting Sean during that.
Oh, that's amazing. Here's Nora having a success and being very visible with the ear protectors that she needs in assemblies and things like that. That's another area where we had to push back, because they would say that particular sensitivity would mean she was better off somewhere quieter. And as you can see, that's not true. She's quite happy and comfortable.
Yeah. It's just one of my favorite visuals, explaining exactly what inclusion is compared to exclusion, segregation, and integration.
I like this one too.
Yeah. And that's just a couple of my favorite sayings. Children who are treated as if they are uneducatable almost invariably become uneducatable. So if you seclude them and just not raise those expectations, that's where they'll remain. And then if you treat an individual as he is, he will stay as he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and could be, he will become what he ought to be and could be. Typo, sorry.
No problem.
And this is just a picture of us at the state capitol. We do a lot of advocating for disability rights. So I'm here with Greg Clausen, Senator Hoffman, and Senator Jim Abel. And Sean, of course, loves going to the Capitol. He, in fact, fell asleep on one of the senator's couches. So, and these are just a couple of examples. If you can take time to read through them, it's just a good way of seeing it differently. And another one of my favorite, special education is not a place. It is supports and services brought to students through an IEP, which can, of course, be in the be done in the general education setting. So another, all children do better in an inclusive environment. There are higher expectations of children with disabilities in an inclusive classroom, and they have opportunities for social interaction they don't have in segregated classrooms. There's also benefits for students without disabilities who get more exposure to diverse learning styles.
And I'll piggyback on that again and say that we have found that all of the students in Nora's classroom have benefited from the attempts for us to include her within this pull-out model that's involved a lot of pushback and a lot of self-awareness and learning how to be a good communicator and collaborator when it feels like you're fighting against something to jump in and work. But there's a picture of one of her fellow students sitting next to Nora with her arm around her. And so one of the things that the inclusive classroom teaches for all students is empathy and understanding. Mm-hmm. It teaches diverse and unique viewpoints. There's a picture of my daughter here wearing a Christmas dress, a Batman cape, and doing a chakra meditation in the middle of a school assembly. And then there's another picture of her on Crazy Hair Day where she had me fashion a spider out of pipe cleaners and attach it to her head.
Nice.
There's a picture here of all of the students in Nora's first grade classroom with their hands all in and Williams Syndrome awareness bracelets. And Nora and I do a presentation in her class about her disability. And so one of the things that happens every year that we've done it after that is that there's a real unity in the classroom, and they all sort of focus on how they can help each other. And I actually noticed a real shift in the adults in the classroom as well in terms of their comfort level.
Oh, yeah.
The inclusive classroom provides students a variety of options in instruction and support. You're going to hear a barrier a lot around resources. And while it's not your problem, you're going to hear that a lot, and there's going to need to be a lot of creative thinking if you're going to build an inclusive IEP and really have an inclusive classroom that works, especially when you're in a district that doesn't do that yet. And when the adults are doing that, the kids learn to do that. So creative problem solving is another piece of the inclusive classroom that all students benefit from. And the last one is my daughter exhibiting one of her good behaviors, which is she tries really hard to make adults happy. So she often is a good role model for attending. Well, she has pretty bad attention span. However, she does try really hard to make adults happy, and so listening to the teacher and walking down the hallway properly, for example. So students get a variety of role models when they're in an inclusive classroom.
Right.
So I know we want to take some questions, and Leslie, do you want to say anything else before we open up for questions?
Just, basically, just keep advocating. If you have to attend an IEP meeting, it's always great to take a parent advocate with you. Your emotions are definitely different when it's your child than if you were attending a friend's IEP meeting. You're able to advocate a lot stronger, and that's normal. The first time that I did that, and I burst into tears. I thought I was the horrible parent, just failing miserably. But I'm learned as I was going along, that's a normal process. So, please reach out to somebody for your help.
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Again, you can type questions if you prefer not to speak, but you can also ask them directly.
Hi guys, this is Terry. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. I just want to thank you for all of your great information. I completely 100% agree with everything you've said, and have had to do similar things with my daughter. I do, however, and maybe this isn't something you can speak to, but I guess I kind of want to bring some awareness to. My son, however, is not developmentally delayed, but he has a lot of emotional issues, and so is currently in a level 4 situation because he's not safe a lot. But we're working on that, and I have to say his team is great. I have no complaints. But is there any advice you can give me in starting to slowly transition someone who has emotional concerns? And again, I know you both come from more of a developmental background, but I'm trying to think outside the box and how we can start making this happen.
And that's a great thing. Meet with the school that you want to move them to. Make sure you check the environment that he's going to be going into. Make the environment work for him, not the other way around. So whether he needs different lighting or seats, they can put that into the classroom directly and actually use it for any student. So it's just, making sure that they make the room feasible for him.
Okay. That's good. Okay.
Yeah, and Terry, I know that you're very involved, but when, in a lot of situations, you're sort of originating an environment or a program that hasn't existed before, but there are lots of other students just like your child who would benefit from that. And so definitely being a part of the SEEK boards, but going to the leadership in the school that you're going to and really trying to collaborate. I know it's a lot of extra work and we could get stuck on what we should have to do, but in a lot of cases, we're building these classrooms from the ground up because, your son isn't safe because that environment doesn't exist for him yet.
Right.
And so I can't speak from personal experience, but I can say that, the underlying idea is the same. How can we create this environment for him and everyone else, because they need that as well.
Right. Because he's starting to seek out friends, but the environment he is not a good environment for friends. And so we really need to make that transition. But you're right, I'm building this from the ground up, and I'm feeling overwhelmed of not even knowing how to do that. And but I think if he could start it, I think we could see some success. But it's just the starting.
Yeah, and you're making changes for all the kids you can do.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying that you're making changes for the future of all kids behind him as well. So, and they, my favorite thing is you do better when you know better. So, and a lot of teachers aren't having you need to make sure that you've got the support of administration too, because if teachers don't have that support, you're going to have to go and get that support.
Mm-hmm. And we got to a little bit of a standstill with Nora's team where the team we were all throwing our hands up, we're not sure how to do this. And at that point, we were able to advocate for a consultant to come in and train the team and work with the school. And so that's one thing that you can either throw out in the front or wait until there's some problems and say, hey, obviously, none of us here quite know how to make this work, and so who can help us? So that's another avenue.
Yeah, and that could be like a educational consultant can come in and look at all aspects of your child's education, including the environment, and they can make the suggestions for you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay.
I think we can take a couple more minutes if there are any additional questions.
Hi, this is Trisha, and I have a question. I've found that my conversations with the team about inclusion seem to go relatively smoothly when I'm talking about things like specials and recess. But when I start to move into academics, I feel like I hit a roadblock a bit. Is there any advice you would have for, making that leap into, talking about the academic inclusion part, or I don't know what you would call it. It's all academic if it's at school, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to me is you first of all need to make sure that you got to find out what page the administration is on first. Teachers are willing to help. They're willing to help. They're willing to get it done. But if they don't have the support of administration, they can't. They get their hands slapped. So you need to make sure that you meet with them. Talk to them about accommodations and modifications. For my son, Sean, if there was a quiz of 20 questions, he would get 5 questions, and he would study those 5 questions, and that's what he would be graded on. They don't have to be at the same academic level as the neurotypical peers. That's why it's called an IEP. It's individualized. So just to remember that is they don't have to be at that same level. They're able to do a smaller amount of work and just be graded on that. So he would have been graded on 5 questions versus 20. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Thank you.
Tricia, I would add to that you can start asking whether there are teachers, general education teachers in your building who are really excellent at differentiating instruction, or who have a special education background, or who have co-teaching experience, and you can perhaps request that he's in their general ed classroom, because they're going to be far more likely to be able to make the inclusion during curriculum time work.
Yeah, and it is the case managers, pretty much their responsibility to do the modification of curriculum. So, meet with your case manager and let them know that, you want them in the gen ed setting. That's where they should be anyways, and that you will work with them. For Sean, they didn't have curriculum edited for sex education, which is a huge issue with the disability community. The teachers came to me and said, we don't know what to do for him. What do you want him to learn? And I'm like, I want him to learn what everybody else is learning, because when he goes into the community, he needs to understand his, the things that can be of danger to him, what can get him into trouble. He's a typical teenager, trust me, a teenage boy. He has wants and desires. So in order for that to be successful, I had to create that curriculum. But I did it because I wanted to ensure he was getting what he needed. They didn't understand how to do it. So, at some point you might have to step in and do it.
Well, and I'm sure there are resources out there that we can use to draw off of too. So thank you. It just opens my mind up a little bit. Thank you.
I would also, at your next IEP, advocate for some minutes in the IEP that would allow for the general education and the case worker or the special education teacher to collaborate outside of class time. Their days are so down to the wire that if you expect to get the type of collaboration it takes to make that work, you're going to have to ask for it to be specifically written into the IEP in order for the teachers to actually have the space in their day to do it.
Yeah.
Well, Leslie and Jamie, I want to thank you so much for such a great presentation and wonderful webinar. I appreciate your expertise and experience in sharing it with everyone else. Are there any last comments before we sign off?
This is Terry. I just want to thank you too. I think
share the slide. Sorry.
I'm sorry, what you're saying?
I was just saying, am I saying that we're going to share the slides with everyone?
Yep.
Okay.
And this is Terry. I just want to thank you guys too.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
You're
everyone.
I look forward to getting the link to the webinar so I can send it on to some of those involved in my child's education and part of his team as well. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Please stand by.